The galaxy was full of stars, but that night many stars looked silent. Worlds that once shined with life now burned with fire. Civilizations that ruled for thousands of years had fallen into dust. Something dark had spread across the spiral arms, something that no empire could stop. From the broken ruins of a once great alien capital, a signal rose. It was not the usual call for trade, not a call for alliance. It was a desperate scream, a cry that echoed across every channel. Help us, whoever hears, this is the galaxy's last SOS. Many races listened, but many turned away. The strong empires closed their borders, the weak prayed in silence. No one dared to answer because they all knew what waited in the dark. It was the swarm, the destroyers, the endless tide that devoured everything. The cry traveled far, beyond the known stars. It reached a world that most aliens whispered about in fear. A planet with storms, with deadly creatures, with an atmosphere that could kill. A planet that had made its children into survivors, fighters, and warriors. That world was Earth. The humans had heard the call. On Deathworld, where survival was written in blood, silence fell. Generals gathered in steel rooms. Leaders stood over glowing maps of stars. For a long time, no one spoke. Then a commander said, "The galaxy calls, and only we will answer." The Council of Nations agreed. It was not kindness alone that pushed them. It was something deeper. Humans knew the taste of desperation. They had lived on a world that never forgave weakness. If the galaxy fell, humanity would face the swarm alone one day. Better to face it now, with others, than later with none. Soon, Earth's skies burned with the fire of engines. Deathworld warriors marched into ships that carried names like Iron Resolve and Storm of Earth. They were not like alien soldiers. They wore armor built to take crushing pressure, to fight in burning heat, to stand in freezing cold. They carried weapons that were heavy even for other species' machines. Every step of a human soldier was proof of evolution's cruelty and strength. In the void of space, the fleets formed. Rows upon rows of warships rose from Earth's orbit, their steel shining in sunlight. From the far moons, smaller craft joined them. On every screen across Earth, people watched in silence. Children pressed their hands to glass windows. Elders saluted with tears. This was not just a war, it was a promise. The journey was long, but no human heart wavered. They knew they were heading into the jaws of the enemy. They knew they were answering a cry that no one else dared answer. But they also knew something else. They were Deathworlders. And Deathworlders never feared the dark. At the edge of the galactic core, the first sight met their eyes. Planets burning, fleets broken, stations turned into drifting graveyards. It was worse than the signal had said. Human captains stood silent, their faces cold with steel. Behind their silence burned fire. On the ground, the first survivors were found. Aliens who had sent the signal looked up with disbelief. They had expected silence, but instead they saw figures in black armor, tall, scarred, with eyes like storms. One alien whispered, "The Deathworld warriors have come." Hope flickered, small and weak, but real. And in that flicker of hope, humanity prepared to fight. The signal had been answered, but the true war was only beginning. The galaxy had called for help, and Earth had answered. But answering the call was only the beginning. Now the Deathworld warriors had to land on a world already burning. The human fleet cut through the dark like blades of steel. Hundreds of ships moved in formation, engines glowing red against the endless night. Alien survivors on the ruined capital. Woe. World looked up, their hearts beating with fear and hope. They saw ships bigger than mountains, ships carrying the fury of Earth itself. As the first wave descended, the sky turned into fire. Flames spread across the horizon as drop pods cut through clouds like falling stars. The sound of thunder shook the broken cities. For the first time in years, the galaxy saw something more terrifying than the swarm. It saw humanity arriving. The pods hit the ground with earth-shaking impact. Hatches exploded open, and human soldiers stepped out. They were taller, heavier, and harder than most aliens had ever seen. Armor sealed around their bodies made them look like living machines. Their rifles hummed with energy, their blades shone like lightning. One alien survivor, shaking, whispered, "Are they here to save us or conquer us?" No one could answer. because the way humans moved, the way their eyes scanned the ruins, spoke only of war. The swarm attacked almost immediately. From the broken streets and shattered towers, creatures poured out like rivers of teeth and claws. They had no fear, no hesitation, only hunger. They screamed as they charged, the sound like 1,000 knives cutting into the mind. But the Deathworld warriors did not break. They stood shoulder to shoulder, weapons raised. Then the human commander gave one signal, and the world shook with fire. Rifles spat streams of burning light. Grenades tore the streets apart. Every shot was placed with brutal precision. Every strike was meant to kill. The swarm crashed against human lines, but humanity did not move back. Instead, they pushed forward, step by step. Every human soldier fought as if this battlefield was their home, because in truth they had been born into battle since birth. Earth itself had trained them for this moment. Above the battlefield, human warships joined the fight. From orbit, heavy cannons rained destruction. Alien survivors hid in fear, yet they watched with awe. For the first time, the swarm was not advancing. For the first time, the swarm was burning. But the fight was far from over. As the battle raged, human scouts discovered something terrible. The signal that called for help had not only reached Earth, it had also been heard by the swarm, and now more enemies were coming, far greater than what humanity faced that day. In the command tent, the human general stood silent. On the holographic map, red light spread across the system like fire. More fleets of the swarm were approaching. If they landed in full, even Deathworld warriors might not be enough. The general's eyes narrowed. He looked at his soldiers, scarred, bloodied, but unbroken, and he spoke only one line. Hold this world, no matter the cost. His words spread like fire through every human fighter. They knew the swarm would come in endless numbers. They knew the ground would turn into rivers of blood, but they also knew this. They were humanity, and humanity did not run. The survivors of the alien capital, once broken and hopeless, now watched with wide eyes. They saw humans fight not just with strength, but with something deeper, with willpower so sharp it cut through fear itself. For the first time in generations, hope grew strong. The Deathworld warriors had landed. The swarm had met its match, but in the shadows of space, the real enemy was gathering. The true war had not yet begun, and humanity was already standing on the edge of fire. The swarm had been stopped on the ground, but only for a moment. Humanity had landed like thunder, their firepower tearing the enemy apart, yet beyond the smoke, the galaxy's old wounds began to bleed again. As human soldiers secured the capital world, alien leaders crept out from hiding. They looked at the human warriors with awe, but also with fear. For centuries, these leaders had ruled through fragile treaties and silent distrust. Now they stood face to face with a species forged in struggle, a species no one had ever truly understood. The alien council gathered in a ruined hall, its ceilings cracked, banners torn, holograms of different races flickered around the chamber. Some spoke with trembling gratitude, thanking humanity for saving them. Others whispered warnings. They are Deathworlders. They will not stop here. Suspicion crawled through every word. The human general stood silent, his armored figure towering in the chamber. His voice was calm, but it struck the council like steel. Earth did not come to rule. We came because the galaxy called. If we fall divided, the swarm will consume us all. For a brief moment, there was silence. But silence in the galaxy was always dangerous, because not every empire wanted humanity to rise as a savior. Some feared that if humans won this war, they would rule the stars. In the shadows, betrayal took root. A faction of alien lords, desperate to keep their own power, sent secret signals. They offered information and safe passage to the swarm. They believed if humanity fell, the balance of the galaxy would remain. But they did not understand that the swarm had no balance. The swarm devoured all, friend or foe. On the battlefield, the effects of betrayal soon appeared. Human patrols were ambushed by enemies who knew their landing zones. Supply ships were struck before they could land. Whispers of spies spread among the troops. Every shadow felt dangerous. Every ally felt uncertain. The soldiers did not break, but tension grew heavy. One captain looked at his men and said, "We came here to fight monsters, but now the monsters wear two faces." In orbit, human fleets scanned the stars. What they found froze even their blood. More swarm fleets were approaching, larger than anything seen before, and worse, some alien fleets were not joining humanity, they were retreating, locking their borders, willing to watch others burn as long as their own worlds survived. The human general called his commanders. The map showed the galaxy's weakness like an open wound. Allies are falling back, one officer reported. They do not trust us, another said bitterly. The general's eyes narrowed, his words sharp and final. Then trust will not save them, but we will. On the ground, alien civilians began to gather around the human camps. They had seen their own rulers flee or betray, but they had also seen human soldiers fight with fire in their eyes. A wounded alien child touched a human soldier's armored glove and whispered, "Don't leave us." The soldier knelt and answered softly, "Humanity does not abandon." In that moment, something changed. Fearful whispers turned into chants of hope. Across ruined streets, aliens began to carry supplies for the humans. They gave what little food and water they had. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy's broken races looked to one people for strength, and that people was humanity. But in the darkness of deep space, the swarm gathered. The betrayal of the alien lords had given them paths, codes, and locations. Soon they would strike not just with numbers, but with knowledge stolen from those who should have been allies. The galaxy thought it had sent its last SOS. But now, the real cry of despair was still to come, and only humanity stood ready to answer. The battles on the capital world had shown the swarm's hunger. But the swarm was not only hunger, it was history. A history that had been buried, whispered, and feared for countless ages. In the ruins, human scouts uncovered carvings, old archives hidden beneath fallen towers, symbols of a war fought long before the rise of most current empires. The words were clear and terrible. The swarm does not invade, the swarm returns. When the human general read these words, silence filled the war room. The swarm was not a new enemy, it was an ancient one. It had come before, and entire civilizations had vanished. The galaxy had forgotten, but the enemy had never stopped. They had simply waited, breeding in the shadows of dead systems. The human commander clenched his fist. If the swarm had destroyed empires greater than these, then humanity was not only fighting for allies, they were fighting against history itself. The swarm adapted faster than anyone imagined. New forms appeared on the battlefield, creatures with armor like steel, wings that cut the air like blades, and minds that coordinated with frightening intelligence. Human soldiers began to call them shadow spawns, because they seemed born from darkness itself. Every battle grew more desperate. The swarm learned to counter rifles, to pierce armor, to overwhelm even tanks. In one night raid, hundreds of creatures breached human lines. For hours, the camp became a storm of fire, teeth, and screams. When dawn came, the ground was black with ash and blood, but humanity did not break. They studied the swarm as carefully as hunters studying prey. Every soldier, every scientist, every commander wrote notes, shared data, improved tactics. Soon, new weapons were forged, flame storms that could scorch the swarm's armored hides, EMP nets that disrupted their hive communication, and traps that turned entire streets into fire pits. The aliens who had once doubted humanity now watched in awe. Where others had only run or surrendered, humans adapted. Where others had only prayed, humans fought back with mind and muscle. Still, the swarm's numbers seemed endless, and now the betrayed truth came clear. The alien lords who had made secret deals had not just betrayed humanity, they had awakened the swarm's full wrath. Whole star systems fell in days, fleets burned, planets turned silent, the human fleet gathered, their map covered in red markers. The general's face was carved from stone as he looked at his captains. "We are not just soldiers," he said, his voice hard. "We are the wall between light and darkness. If we fall, the galaxy ends." Even as he spoke, new reports arrived. The swarm was building something in the deep void, a fortress of living matter, a hive world moving through space like a planet. It consumed moons and asteroids, growing larger with every cycle. This was not an army, it was a living weapon, a weapon that had ended galaxies before. For a moment, silence filled the command chamber. Then the human general's eyes turned sharp as steel. He pointed at the map and said only one line, "We survived Deathworld. We will break this shadow too." Across the galaxy, whispers spread. The Deathworlders are fighting the swarm. The humans are turning despair into defiance. For the first time in ages, hope traveled with the same speed as fear. But the shadow enemy was not finished. Their hive mind had learned the truth about humanity. They now feared one thing above all. Not human weapons, not human ships, but human will. And in the darkness of the hive world, the swarm queen opened her mind. She whispered across the void. This time, Deathworlders will be crushed. The galaxy was breaking under the weight of the swarm. World after world fell into silence. Fleets vanished in fire. Even the strongest empires saw their borders crumble. But in the middle of despair, one name began to rise. Humanity. The Deathworld warriors had not only fought, they had endured. Every defeat taught them new tactics. Every scar became a lesson. Where others surrendered, humans adapted. Where others prayed for survival, humans planned for victory. On the ruined capital, human generals called a war council. Representatives of alien species filled the chamber, their faces marked with fear. They expected humans to demand obedience, to claim leadership through force. But instead, the human general spoke with calm fire. "We are not here to rule you," he said. "We are here to fight beside you, because if we stand apart, we will all die." The words struck like lightning. For the first time, many alien leaders looked at Ons, another and nodded, not with trust, not yet, but with something closer to hope. If Deathworlders believed survival was possible, perhaps it was. And so the first true alliance of the war was born. Not an alliance of politics, but an alliance of desperation. Ships of many shapes and colors gathered beside human fleets. Soldiers who had once feared humans now trained beside them. The galaxy's broken armies began to move as one. The swarm felt the shift immediately. From their hive world, they unleashed new storms of creatures. But now the battlefield was different. Human strategy was no longer alone. Alien fleets fought under human coordination. Every ship became part of a larger blade. Every soldier became part of a greater shield. The first great battle of the new alliance erupted near the twin suns of Corrales. The swarm poured in like a sea of fire. The alliance fleets formed a wall of steel. For hours, the sky turned into chaos. Ships shattered, stars burned brighter as weapons tore through the void. The swarm roared forward, endless, merciless. But for the first time, they did not break the defenders. On the ground, the fighting was worse. The swarm swarmed across cities like rivers of teeth. But human and alien soldiers stood together. Where a line was about to fall, human squads reinforced it. Where fear spread, human commanders barked orders that turned fear into fury. Alien soldiers who once trembled at human presence now shouted, "Stand with the Deathworlders." Slowly, painfully, the tide began to turn, not because the swarm grew weaker, but because the galaxy grew stronger. And at the heart of that strength was humanity. But victory came with sacrifice. Hundreds of human soldiers fell in the fighting. Entire fleets were lost to keep a single world alive. The swarm tore through defenses again and again. But each time the humans pulled the alliance back together. Each time they turned loss into resilience. In the middle of the battle, a human captain broadcast his voice across every channel. "We are the children of Deathworld," he shouted. "We do not bow, we do not break, and neither will you." His words spread faster than any weapon. Alien soldiers who had been retreating turned back to fight. Fleets that had been breaking reformed into walls of fire. The swarm felt it. For the first time in memory, their advance slowed. Their endless tide met a wall that did not collapse. The hive mind pulsed with unease, because they understood something they had never faced before. Not stronger weapons, not sharper blades, but willpower. When the battle ended, the stars burned with wreckage. Thousands of ships were gone, millions were dead, but the swarm had been stopped. The galaxy had survived another day, and in the silence after the war's roar, one truth echoed through every fleet. The turning tide had begun, because humanity had shown the galaxy that the swarm could bleed, and if it could bleed, it could be beaten. The turning tide had given the galaxy hope. But hope alone could not defeat the swarm. The hive world was still moving, a living fortress swallowing stars. And it was coming closer with every cycle. Humanity knew the next battle would not be another defense. It would be the final siege. If the hive world reached the core systems, the galaxy would burn forever. So Earth prepared something it had never revealed. Weapons forged in silence, secrets buried under the soil of Deathworld. The Alliance fleets gathered, stretching across the void in numbers never seen before. Ships from 100 species, armored with human upgrades, engines pulsing with human designs. Alien commanders admitted what they had once feared to say. The humans are not only warriors, they are builders of survival. In the great war room aboard the flagship Iron Resolve, the human general stood before the map. The swarm hive world glowed like a black sun, feeding on moons, and asked. Aeroids, every pulse of its core sent out new armies. Every breath it took was the death of a system. The general's voice cut through the silence. We cannot wait for the swarm to come. We will take the war to them. We will strike at the hive world itself. Gasps spread among the alien leaders. No one had ever dared such madness. To attack the swarm's nest was to invite death. But humanity did not believe in impossible. Humanity had lived with impossible since its first breath. The secret weapons were unveiled, stealth armadas hidden for decades, built in the shadows of forgotten moons, planet crackers, massive cannons capable of splitting worlds, and new soldiers in experimental armor, exosuits that made humans into walking juggernauts. These were not just weapons, they were the fury of Deathworld made flesh. The swarm knew. Their hive mind trembled with anticipation. They gathered billions of soldiers, enough to drown any star system. The Queen's voice spread across the void. This time, Deathworlders will be erased. And so began the final siege. The Alliance fleets launched, their engines lighting up the darkness. Human warships cut through the swarm's first lines. Alien fleets followed, their firepower sharper under human command. The sky turned into a storm of fire and death. On the hive world's surface, humanity landed once again, but this was not like before. The ground itself fought them, pulsing with organic towers, rivers of acid, and swarms that poured endlessly from the earth. The air burned, the soil screamed, the sky bled. It was not a battlefield, it was a nightmare made real. Human soldiers marched anyway. Exosuits crushed creatures like insects. Flamethrowers burned rivers of flesh. Every step forward was bought with blood. But humanity had learned long ago that survival was never free. The Queen unleashed her greatest weapons. Colossal beasts taller than towers, armored with living steel. They roared with voices that shook the air. Alien soldiers froze in terror, but humans charged. One juggernaut shouted into the comms, "We survived. Deathworld storms. This is just another storm." The battle raged for hours, then days. In space, the swarm's endless fleet slammed into the Alliance. Ships cracked, planets shattered, suns flickered under the fury. But the humans pushed again and again. Every loss became a reason to strike harder. Every sacrifice became a banner for survival. At last, the secret weapon was prepared. The planet cracker cannon aimed at the hive world's core. The humans had to hold the line until it charged. If they failed, everything was lost. The Swarm Queen felt it. She threw everything she had. Billions of creatures stormed across land and space. The void itself seemed to bleed. The galaxy trembled, and at the center of the storm, humanity stood, exhausted, bloodied, but unbroken, because they were not just fighting for Earth, they were fighting for every voice that had sent the SOS, for every child hiding in shadows, for every star that still burned. The final shot was close. The cannon charged with a sound like the heartbeat of a dying star. The swarm rushed closer. The Queen screamed across the void, and the general whispered one final command. Hold. The planet cracker cannon glowed with unbearable light. Its core hummed like the heart of a dying star. Every ship in orbit, every soldier on the ground felt the vibration in their bones. This was the moment that would decide the galaxy's fate. The Swarm Queen screamed through the void, her voice shaking the minds of billions. Creatures threw themselves into the cannon's path, sacrificing everything to stop it. The hive world pulsed, its ground splitting open, birthing rivers of flesh and fire. It was not just a planet anymore. It was alive, and it was desperate. Human soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder. Their armor was cracked, their weapons nearly empty, their bodies bleeding, but not a single one stepped back. They knew the cannon needed time, and time was something only they could give. In the skies, human and alien fleets fought to the edge of madness. Every second cost a ship, every minute cost 1,000 lives, but still the wall of steel held. Because behind them, the galaxy waited for salvation. The Swarm Queen's voice turned into rage. You are fragile. You are temporary. You cannot defeat eternity. But the human general answered with a voice of iron. We are Deathworlders. We were born in storms, and storms do not fear eternity. The final wave came, larger than anything before. The swarm poured like oceans of teeth, claws, and wings. The ground shook as titanic beasts slammed into human lines. Exosuits cracked, flamethrowers burned dry, soldiers fell one after another. But for every human that fell, another stepped forward, and their line did not break. The cannon reached full charge. Its light pierced the clouds, spreading across the sky like dawn. The general gave the final order, his voice steady as stone. Fire. The blast tore through the hive world. It was not a beam, but a star unleashed. The surface split. Towers of flesh burned. Oceans of swarm boiled away. The queen screamed, her voice turning into static. And then silence. A silence deeper than the void itself. The hive world cracked apart, breaking into pieces that drifted into nothingness. The swarm across the galaxy froze, their hive mind shattered. For the first time in countless ages, the tide ended. The galaxy was free, but the victory was not without cost. Half the human fleet lay in ruins. Entire cities of aliens turned to ash. On the ground, only a fraction of the soldiers who landed stood alive, their armor broken, their faces hollow, but their eyes still burning. The survivors raised their banners, not in triumph, but in remembrance, for those who had fallen, for those who had answered the galaxy's last SOS. The galaxy looked upon humanity and saw not monsters, not Deathworld demons, but saviors, forged in the harshest fire, allies, and leaders who had once whispered with fear now bowed their heads. They knew the truth could never be hidden. When the galaxy cried out, only Earth had answered. When hope had died, only humans had brought it back. The general stood before the gathered fleets, his voice tired but unbroken. Remember this day, he said, not because humanity won, but because together we survived. And his final words echoed through every channel, every ship, every broken star. When the galaxy called, humanity answered. In the silence that followed, the galaxy changed forever. Humans, once feared as Deathworlders, were now remembered as guardians, not because they were stronger than all, but because they refused to fall when all others had. The war was over, but the legend of that final SOS and the Deathworld warriors who answered would never die.